If you're wondering if industrial sewing machine is for you, this video might answer this question. Hi, my name is Julie and welcome to my channel where we talk everything sewing. In this video we will be talking about industrial sewing machines for home sewing and how they compare to domestic sewing machines. I'll be sharing my own personal experience as well as what I've observed by watching different seamstresses throughout the years. This video will be from 3 segments. In the first part I will tell you why I got the industrial sewing machine. In the second I will share the specific details as well as features that I do and don't like. And in the third, final part, I will answer the questions about industrial sewing machines that you submitted through Instagram. Now let's get started. So first, why I got the industrial sewing machine. I've been sewing on and off for 15 years. And in the first 8 to 9 years, I was completely self-taught. And those who are sewing for quite a long time, you might remember that back in the day, the resources on the internet were not as widely available as they are now. And at a certain point, I felt that I reached a certain quality level and I cannot go with my skills past that level without external help. This is why I decided to enroll into a vocational sewing school. This particular school was oriented not towards fashion design, but to training professional seamstresses to work in ateliers, to do alterations, and etc. etc. So they were very focused on that professional sewing side. Because of that, all of the machines that we had there were industrial sewing machines. And this is where I got to try the industrial sewing machine for the first time. And I was completely smitten and I fell in love with that industrial power. So it's very difficult to tell why the industrial is very different from domestic sewing machine, because it does have a lot to do with the feeling that you get when you're sewing. So I know that a lot of people are emphasizing on the speed side because, you know, the industrials are much faster than the domestic sewing machines. But when you're sewing clothing, that doesn't really matter because you're not sewing that fast. And for me personally, the industrial sewing machine is much more about control that you get over your seam, and that control is very difficult to explain by words. It's something that you need to feel for yourself. But yes, once I felt that power and that control of the industrial sewing machine, I completely fell in love. So I went to sewing school for 2 years, and my goal there was to maximize what I'm learning and really locking in that knowledge. So what I would do, for example, if we were sewing a skirt at school, I would go home and I would recreate a second skirt using the same techniques to really lock in that knowledge. Now the side effect, what happened at school, I was sewing a garment using industrial sewing machine. I would go home and I would make the same garment on the domestic sewing machine, and so I had the possibility to compare how both machines perform on the exact same item with the same techniques. The more I sew with the industrial machine, the more I got frustrated with my own domestic machine. Now looking back, I understand that I wasn't comparing apples to apples, and I was comparing my very budget-friendly domestic sewing machine, which is really like entry medium price level machine, and I was comparing it to industrial sewing machine, which was really incomparable. But the more I sewed with the industrial, the more I got frustrated with the domestic machine, and this led to me not wanting to sew at home at all because I just was feeling like I was sewing with the kind of toy machine. Now, don't get me wrong, the machine that I had, the domestic one that I had, was actually a good machine. You can get great results, but just when you're switching between these two very different machines, it kind of created a mismatch in my expectations, and I just grew really unhappy with that machine. So I started playing with the idea of getting industrial for home. However, at the time we were living in a very small space in a small apartment, and as you can see, this industrial machine really takes up a lot of space, so I wasn't sure if the industrial was the right choice for home. So I did some digging and investigations of maybe I should get just an upgrade domestic machine, and what I found out that the domestic machine that I kinda would like to get would cost me around 1,000 euros. while the industrial sewing machine, which I initially wanted, would cost me around 500-600 euros. So essentially, I would be paying twice as much for a product that I wouldn't really like and would be a compromise. So after a lot of consideration, I just decided to just go ahead. We will figure out the living space and just got the industrial sewing machine that you see behind me. This is the sewing machine that I've been using for the last 5 years. I absolutely love it. For me personally, it was really worth getting it, and every single time that I sew with this machine, I'm very happy. I had zero problems with it throughout those 5 years. And this brings us to the second part of the video, where I tell you about the specifications and the features of the industrial sewing machine. So first and foremost, let's talk about money and prices. So one of the myths surrounding industrial sewing machines is that they are very expensive, and I want to burst that bubble. So this particular machine, which you see behind me, is Jack A2 straight stitch machine, and 5 years ago I bought it for 550 euros. This is including the table as well as additional features such as automatic thread cutting. For comparison, the domestic sewing machine that I have is Singer Heavy Duty 4423 machine, which costs about 200 euros, which is a lower medium priced machine. So as you see, the industrial sewing machine is pricier than the lower medium priced domestic machine, but it's definitely cheaper than the higher priced premium domestic sewing machines. So one thing that I want to add, that the prices for industrial machines vary depending on the region, but this is the price that I paid 5 years ago in Europe. Last time I checked, the prices are a little bit up, but the price difference is about maybe 50 euros, not more. So the prices are a little bit up, but nothing too crazy. Considering that the industrial sewing machine can easily serve you 15, 20, 25 years, I think that 500, 600 euros is a very good price. Now onto these specifications a little bit. So first, I mentioned the speed already, that industrial sewing machines are really much faster than the domestic sewing machines. So the domestic machines usually sew at around 800 stitches per minute. My particular model, Singer Heavy Duty, is sewing at 1100 stitches per minute, which is above the average of domestic sewing machine speed. Industrial sewing machines sew at around 3,500 to 5,500 stitches per minute, so it's much faster than the domestic sewing machine. However, I do not think that if you're sewing for yourself and you're sewing clothing, speed is really a very important metric, because you're never kind of sewing at full speed. You're just not sewing long enough seams to really get that full effect and really save time from that hold speed. The industrial sewing machines have less functions than domestic sewing machines. So for example, this one just does one straight stitch compared to my domestic sewing machine that can do 23 stitches. But everything that industrial does, it does like better and in higher quality. So for example, if it sews a straight seam, it will sew that straight seam nicely, no matter how many layers you're putting, no matter what kind of fabric you're putting, it will sew flawlessly. Looking from external side, the industrial is fully metal compared to the domestic ones, very often made from using a lot of plastic. In particular, for me, the very big difference was in the controller. So the controller for industrial is very big, it's very solid, and you can just press it very accurately, versus on the domestic machine, they're usually kind of flimsy and plasticky, and they don't get very good feel unless you have a premium machine which comes with a different controller. The industrial sewing machine has a knee lifter, which is very comfortable when you're sewing and you need to just lift that presser foot. This is also the feature that is available on some domestic machines, but again, those are already, we're talking about a bit more premium and not entry-level sewing machines. The particular thing that I like about my Jack A2 model is the auto thread cutting function. Now, this is a function that not all industrial sewing machines have, but if you have a possibility to choose a machine with this function, I highly recommend it. It's very comfortable. So when you're finishing the seam, you're just pushing the controller controller with the heel and it automatically neatly cuts the thread. This is also the function that is available in some domestic machines, so if you have that function, I highly recommend using it. It does give a beautiful, neat results. So my favorite thing about industrial sewing machines is that they give so much control over your results and so much control over what you're sewing. You really can sew various fabrics, multiple layers at a time, and be jumping from multiple layers to single layers, and machine will sew everything flawlessly. You have so much control, and this is something that I love the most about industrial sewing machine. I do sew various fabrics, and most often people ask if I sew knits using my industrial. Yes, I do also sew a lot of knit fabrics using my industrial sewing machine, and you just need to be using a special needle and sometimes a special thread. So now on to kind of minuses, or something that you need to consider when buying the industrial. So despite the fact that I got the industrial sewing machine, I also kept my domestic sewing machine for a few reasons. So number one is the buttonholes, because this particular machine cannot do buttonholes. There is an attachment, but I saw how it works. I didn't really like it. I don't feel like it's something that I want to add to my sewing machine, so I kept the domestic sewing machine mainly for the buttonholes. The second reason why I kept my domestic sewing machine was for the twin needle when I want to create an elastic hem. This one doesn't sew with the twin needle, but domestic sewing machine does. Also, domestic sewing machines have way more accessories, so if I want to play with various presser feet, I can play on domestic machine because it's much cheaper to get those accessories for a domestic machine. Some people keep the domestic machine for the zigzag option because, again, this one does only a straight stitch, but I personally don't use zigzag. I instead use serger, so zigzag is not that needed function for me. Another thing that you need to take into consideration when talking about industrial sewing machines is that they do take a lot of space. So the table is 1 meter length and width is about 50 centimeters, so it does take a lot of space, and you need to have a dedicated space for your sewing machine, versus with domestic sewing machine, once you finish sewing you can just put it whenever. Also, it's not easy to move this machine around. You need like 2 people to just lift it up, so that also might be inconvenient if you want to like move it from one part of home to another part of home, or maybe if you want to get the machine serviced, that will be a headache to do. Lucky for me, I never had any issues with this particular machine over 5 years that I had it. One more thing that you need to consider about industrial sewing machines, that the accessories are a bit more pricey and less available than those for domestic sewing machines. So once you get a grip of that, that's not that big of a problem. You just plan ahead. But if you're used to just going to the standard sewing supply store and getting everything at once there, you might not find anything for industrial sewing machine, and you might want to find a specific shop that sells those items. Again, this is not a big deal, but it does require a bit of planning ahead. I also want to talk a little bit about things that I got for my sewing machine that I absolutely love. So first and foremost, to those who have this particular Jack A2 model, you might notice that I have a wooden tabletop instead of the plastic one that comes in the standard set of the machine. So this tabletop cost extra. I paid about 20 euros if I remember correctly, and my dealer had the option to switch to the wooden table, and I really love this. It looks way better than the plastic one in our home, and yeah, it's just very sturdy, beautiful looking, and I personally think that those 20 euros were worth doing this upgrade. The second thing that I got for my machine that I absolutely love is this lamp. It has the adjustable height, and it also has a lot of light. It's 2200 aluminum concentrated to one area. I always recommend this lamp because it's such a game changer. You don't have to have an industrial sewing machine for this. This lamp will work with any table that you have. I personally really recommend having it in your sewing space. It just lights up the area so well, and you can see everything so clearly, and your eyes won't feel any strain or or anything, because everything will be just very well lit. If you're interested in this lamp, I will add the Amazon link in the description down below. So overall, I'm very happy with my particular machine. I think that it's a great price quality ratio, and I do believe that this machine will serve me for 20 more years. I've been sewing for it for 5 years already. I sew quite a lot and I had never had any issues, and I never had to have it serviced. So now let's move on to our third part of the video, which is answering your questions. So, could you make an industrial machine work in a small setting without a dedicated sewing room? Yes, you can. So, I am sewing in a part of our bedroom, so I don't have a dedicated room for this. I'm sewing in a space which is about 6 maybe square meters, part of our bedroom, right? And I fit here in that 6 square meter space. I fit this table for sewing machine, also my cutting table, camera gear, all the lights, and ironing table whenever I'm sewing. And every single content piece that you see on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok is filmed in those 6 square meters. I hope that answers your question. I do consider that this space is rather small. I don't have a dedicated room, but I make that space work. I never had a dedicated room for sewing in my life. So for me, these 6 meters dedicated space is a lot, and I never had that before. I'm very happy with my space and I make it work. Do you have a variety of presser feet? Yes, I do have several different feet. I had the most essential basics, which is of course universal foot, then the side feet, the invisible zipper foot, which I also consider to be a staple and a must-have. And I also recently bought a top stitching foot and the binding foot, which I'm very interested in trying out. Now, compared to domestic sewing machines, industrial sewing machine feet are a bit more pricey. I usually pay around 5 to 15 euros for one foot. For comparison, the domestic machine set that I bought for my Zinger heavy-duty machine on Amazon costed like 20 euros for 32 presser feet, so there is a very big difference in price. Also, industrial sewing machine feet are not very widely available, and whenever I want to buy a new foot, I have to find a special store that carries a good selection of those feet. Can you make professional looking clothing on a domestic machine? Yes, you absolutely can. Whenever I'm talking about sewing machines, I try to emphasize that the sewing machine is just a tool, and the quality of the garment will depend on your skill and how much effort and time you're putting into making something. So as a comparison, think about a person who cooks well, like a person who makes your favorite meal at home. This person may not be the person with the best oven or the best mixer or the best knives. This person has great cooking skills, are using good ingredients, and therefore their dishes taste very well. So this is also true for sewing. The person who sews well at home not necessarily has the best sewing machine. They're putting a lot of effort, they have developed their skills, they're constantly learning, and they're putting a lot of time and effort into creating their garments, and that is the main factor that makes your clothing look good and professionally made. The machine helps, but it won't do the work for you. What needle types can be used with industrial sewing machine? The industrial sewing machine has all the types just as domestic sewing machine, except for the twin needle, because industrial straight stitch machine doesn't sew with a twin needle. Now, industrial sewing machine needles are changed quite difficultly, and it does take a few installs to get it really right, because the very interesting thing is, at domestic sewing machines, if you had the needle taken out, you notice that one side is flat, so it's very easy to know how to install the needle, versus the industrial sewing machine needle is completely round, so it's very tricky to install it correctly. Personally, when the first time I changed my needles, I did it incorrectly. And then I had to do a lot of Googling to find how to fix that mistake. And even now, to this day, whenever I'm changing the industrial sewing machine needle, I'm very focused so that I get it right. It's a bit tricky. But to answer your question, yes, you can have a variety of different needles that work with the industrial sewing machine. Again, these needles are not as widely popular as domestic sewing machines. So if you're buying your fabrics, for example, at one store, that store may not necessarily have industrial needles. Are industrial sewing machines excellent for stretchy fabrics knit? Yes. To sew knit fabrics with industrial sewing machine, you have to use a proper needle which is able to handle jersey fabrics, and I personally love using elastic threads to get that really elastic seam. With these two components, you can sew knit fabrics very easy. In what way does it do more better than a high quality domestic sewing machine? It doesn't do more. I would say it does less because it does just one stitch versus high quality domestic machine usually does like 200 plus different stitches. These are very different machines and it's very difficult to compare them. I personally think that high quality domestic machines are amazing. You have a very wide applications, you have very good selection of stitches, you can use different feet, presser foot, you can take advantage of the fact that that machine is portable. Lots of great features versus with the industrial, in my opinion, you get more control over your sewing quality. That's one. And two, if you like to sew very difficult fabrics, think like faux leather, denim, multiple denim layers, I think that industrial handles it better than the domestic machine. Sewing with industrial is really something that you have to feel for yourself and to feel if it's right for you. For me personally, it was right for me. I love that industrial power and industrial control, but I'm not saying that domestic machines are bad. I think that they are great also, and they work for some people flawlessly. The Juki 2 is a straight stitch machine. What do you use for zigzag, if at all? I personally don't like zigzag stitch at all. I know this is a bit controversial, but I do believe that it makes items look homemade, and I personally don't like to use it. If I want to do a zigzag instead of zigzag finish, I choose serger. In my opinion, it gives a bit better looking results, neater, cleaner, and just it lasts longer because the fabric does not fray as much as it does with the zigzag. However, there are so many different finishes that you can do with straight stitch, like French seam, bias binding, Hong Kong seam. They create beautiful, stunning, long-lasting results that look way more professional than zigzag stitch. So for me, not having a zigzag stitch option is not a problem at all. I don't like using it, and I think that there are far more better finishes that you can do instead of zigzag. As a rough estimate of percentages, how often do you need any other stitch than straight stitch? So this really depends on what kind of finishes you like to use in your garments. So sometimes you can do the same garment and use completely different finishes. So let's take this dress as an example. By the way, this dress is made using my own pattern. If you like this design, I will link in the description box my Etsy patterns shop where you can find this particular design. Now back to the question. So this particular version of the dress is made using serger finish as raw edge finish. So I would say that about 80% of the seams of the dress are finished with straight stitch, and then the rest are made using the overlock stitch. However, the same dress, the same design, but this time for the finish I chose the French seam. So the dress is fully made with the straight stitch. So it really does depend on what kind of finishes you're selecting. Also, what you're making is a really important factor. For example, if you're making coats, you can make the full coat just with a straight stitch. versus if you're making lightweight dresses, you might want to add like serger finish for those raw edges to make it faster, easier and lightweight. By the way, this does not apply to knits. When I'm sewing knits, I sew most of the seams on my serger instead of my industrial machine. How does noise vibration compare on the jack versus domestic? Jack is quite silent machine unless you're sewing at full speed, which never happens, but my domestic sewing machine is also quite quiet, I think. So they're kind of the same sound volume range, I think, and neither of those like very stand out with the sound volume. My serger, however, is very noisy and I don't like that part about it at all. Thoughts on getting an industrial used? So this is a good question, and for me personally, I can share my own experience on this. When I was looking into this question 5 years ago, when I was choosing the machine, this machine cost brand new with 2-year warranty was 550 euros, and the used ones were ranging from 100 to 350 euros. Now for that 100, the machine was really beat, it was really used, and it just did not look good. I was buying an item for 20 years, so I didn't want to get that item that already looks bad and already looks used a lot. So I was looking more into those machines that were costing like 350 euros. They were looking good, they didn't look used at all. However, they didn't have several features that we wanted, for example like auto thread cutting, and plus they didn't have the warranty. So for me, because I was buying my first industrial machine, I was buying it for 20 years, it was really important to get the warranty and to get all the features that I wanted. So it made sense for me to add those extra 200 euros and get a machine that I wanted brand new from the dealer. Also, whenever you're buying a new machine or a used machine, always check if the service is available in your city, because very often the dealers are located very far away. If you have any problems with your machine, who will help you? Like this is, I think, also a very important thing to think about when you're buying the industrial machine. Always check about the service situation in your city. Is it difficult to give maintenance on an industrial one? Is it hard to set up or learn how to make adjustments? Very straightforward machine. It's very easy. You just adjust the tension like here. Whenever you need to change the oil, you just flip this, and underneath there is a tank for oil. You just drain the oil, clean the machine and fill it with new oil. Now the oil I want to show you, I actually have a package over here. So if you ever change oil on domestic sewing machines, you know that the oil comes in those little tiny tubes, and this is the tube that industrial machine oil comes in. There's 1 liter of oil, and I need to actually do maintenance on my machine. This is why I have it right here. So yeah, you need a lot of oil, and it's not available like in standard sewing supply store. You like really need to get it somewhere. Overall, very easy to keep maintenance on your industrial sewing machine, and it's not an issue at all. You can get a grip really fast, and maybe rethreading the machine was a bit scary for me at first, but after a few tries I can do it now with my eyes closed. It's really very simple to use and maintain this machine once you get a little bit of experience. Where did you get that light for your industrial machine? I love my lamp. I will link it down below in the description box with the Amazon link. It's a similar lamp. I love this lamp. I always recommend it because I personally love that lamp. It's fantastic. It gives so much light, and yeah, the best part is that you can move it up or down depending on what's more comfortable for you. I love it. I will link it down in the description box. Can you sew any materials, fabric, leather, etc.? Yes, you can sew any kind of fabric and material on the industrial, and it does handle it very well. One thing you need to know, that when you're sewing leather, you need to use leather needle and a suitable thread. If you're sewing knits, you need to use appropriate needle to really get good seam quality results. Other than that, even with a thick, tough fabrics industrial sew very well. Okay, and final part, what do you think about Jack versus Juki? So I don't really like comparing one brand to another, but I can share why I chose Jack over Juki. So there are quite a few reasons. Number one, at sewing school we were using Jack machines, and my line of thought was that if the Jack machine can handle 50 new seamstresses trying to learn to sew at it from zero and that machine doesn't break, that is probably a reliable, good machine, and it won't break on me either. So this was one reason why I got it. The second reason why I got it, at least in my country 5 years ago, when I was choosing my machine, Jack was considerably cheaper than Juki, I think by maybe 30% or something like that. For me, the budget was important, and that played a big role, because 30% is a very big price difference if there isn't a very significant difference in features. Maybe the most important part is that in the city where I live, the Jack has a dealership, and the service person that is doing repairs at that store was also the service person for machines at our sewing school. So I knew his competence, I trusted him, and I knew that if I ever have any problems with my Jack, he will be able to help me, versus the Juki service is in another city, so I would have to drive there in case I have any issues, and that would be very complicated. So here are the main three reasons why I chose Jack over Juki. But in my opinion, whichever brand you choose, you will have a quality machine that you will love and absolutely use for a very, very long time. So these are all the topics that I wanted to cover today about industrial sewing machines for home use. If you like this video, please hit the like button and leave a comment down below with the topic you would like me to cover next. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!